Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. Today I spoke with Jack and who killed Kennedy and why. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. It's great to have you on. How are you doing?
Doing great. So glad to have. So I'm so happy that you had me here for your show today.
Yeah, no, it's an absolute pleasure. Randomly, as we were just quickly catching up, and it's in the bio as well, but how do you go from being a former prosecutor to a pitching coach?
Oh, well, so growing up, I was, as you can probably see from all my things here, I absolutely knew I was going to be the quarterback for the Washington Redskins. I was into pro football. I was into baseball. I played baseball in high school. Then I played in college. And then I majored in history, and then I got a master's degree in history, and I really had every intention of just teaching and coaching for the rest of my life. And after I finished my master's degree in history on the Kennedy assassination, I did my thesis. I decided to go to law school. I always had an interest in law and politics, so I go to law school. And my favorite professor was this wonderful man, law professor, said, well, to really complete the legal experience or the law school experience, you need to go practice. I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to practice, my dad was in law enforcement, I'd lean towards wanting to be a prosecutor. So I got a prosecutor's job, and I went to another city. Then the baseball thing just took off. While I was in law school, to make extra money, I hung out my shingle as a pitching instructor and hitting instructor. And I happened to be in Virginia Beach when it went crazy with talent. David Wright, Josh Root, Michael Kadire, Mark Reynolds. I ended up working in a building with about 6 or 8 kids that played in the major leagues. So that was blowing up. Right. It was great. It was beautiful. I had Justin Verlander on a fall ball team out of Goochland, west of Richmond. He was on a team with us one fall. So I have all this talent. So I have a lawyer buddy that says, hey, you want to be a sports agent? And I'm like, well, I'm hanging around baseball players. Worst business on the face of the earth. But I did that for a little bit, got out of the prosecutor thing, went to work with a law firm that did general practice, loved the people, love them to this day. They're always saying, when are you coming back? It's been like 15 years. And, and during that time, I decided I found a college where I could teach criminal justice and coach. So I went back into coaching. I am still licensed to practice. There's a young attorney in Virginia Beach that I kind of mentor. We do some stuff together. It's a nasty business in some ways, being a lawyer. It's not all it's cracked up to be, but I love teaching. I think you can do far more to make the world a better place by teaching young people than you can trying to keep them out of a DUI. I did defense work too.
I think that's sometimes the problem, isn't it? Is when you do anything legal, you have this ethics that everybody has the right to a lawyer. In the UK, everybody has a right to a solicitor. But everybody has a right to some form of legal advice. And whoever is giving that legal advice, even if they think you're the worst person on the earth, if you are scum itself from Satan's own heart, we are required to provide professional, proper legal advice. And if the police officer, the prosecutor, the whoever hasn't done their due diligence, and I spot that, I have to be the one that points it out, and I have to be the one that lets you walk wherever I want you to or not. And it's a difficult position to be in, because whichever way you go, your integrity is gone.
Yeah, and I never really, I didn't do the triple homicide cases or someone that molested a child, but I did a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
And it's as a defense attorney. So when I end up on the other side, and I did a show the other day and I said this, I heard a lot of people in the prosecutor's office say, like I heard a young lady one day say, well, I didn't feel strong about the evidence we had on this defendant today, but if he didn't do this, he probably did something else. I'm like, whoa, that didn't sound good. And I used to open one of my, many of my classes in teaching criminal justice with, I believe it was the William Blackstone, the old quote about better 100 guilty go free than an innocent person be punished. Yeah. And I'd ask that of the class, and somebody like, well, what if one of those 100, had harmed a child or something? I'm like, okay, then you're willing to go pull 20 years in a penitentiary. They're like, well, no, I didn't say that. I'm like, then you don't believe it.
Yeah.
You don't believe it. And so what he's saying is we hope the system gets all 100 or I'm sorry, every innocent person free, even if it means we miss some of the people that are guilty. So I'll say this, once I became a defense attorney, I never had a problem at all with making the state prove its evidence. And
no, exactly.
Again, I was right. But another thing that friends would say, like, well, didn't you think your person was guilty? And I'm like, every time. Yeah, sure. Like, I thought they did it. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't about that. But you see how cops will run fast and loose and do things they shouldn't have done. And I had a case one time. It was an assault and battery case, but I knew the young lady. She came to me and she'd lost in the lower court, and we appealed it to circuit court. That's how the system works in Virginia. And she's telling me the cop came in and said she witnessed the assault when she couldn't possibly. And I'm like, wait a minute, you got convicted on a cop straight out. In circuit court, I absolutely proved in front of 25 cops in the room that she lied. Yeah. Everybody in the room knew it. Yeah. And they're all rolling their eyes like, holy cow. And so it does happen. Do I think she punched the guy in the face? Yes. Do I think it was assault? Nah, it was a little bit of mutual. But the bottom line was, you get in there, you make up your mind, yep, they probably did it. Now, state, prove it. If the state can't prove it, or they drop the ball, yeah, that's it. Right.
Because this is totally. The problem is you can't have ethical decisions if you don't start with integrity. And integrity means, whether I like it or not, what is the correct thing to do. And you may be guilty, but the state has to prove that with the evidence required by the judicial system. We can't go down the road of, well, I know you did it, I know you're a horrible person, so I'm going to lie because that makes it right. Because integrity is a hole that never stops digging itself once you let it go.
Well put. You know? Well put. Oh, well put. No, it caves in on you then. It's no doubt. If you, and that's one of the things. And really, in the practice of law, if you're ever caught being less than truthful, you're done. Yeah, you're done. You know, if the judge sees it or anybody in the profession sees it, once your credibility's shot, you really don't have much of a career left.
And then it's an interesting dilemma, but I do believe that, you know, the minute you dig that hole, it just keeps burying itself, and you'll never get out of it.
Well, you know, and the other thing about it is, we all bear the image of God, and I remember a case one time. I got a kid out of a traffic situation. And he walked in the door and he says, hey, I got to tell you right up front, I just pulled a 1.5 years in the penitentiary in Virginia, or, in the correctional facility. And I'm trying to get my life straight. I'm in culinary school. I'm flipping burgers over at Fuddruckers restaurant, and I said, okay. And then the cop mischarged him. He charged him with something he couldn't have possibly done, and that was alter or mutilate or something to a license. And he told me, because I've never had a license. I've always driven without a license. He meant to charge him with driving on suspended or revoked. So I let the guy put on the evidence. I said, Your Honor, what he charged him with is this, which he can't possibly do, etc. The cop looks at the judge and says, you're not really listening to this, are you? And she says, well, I'm like, Your Honor, you have to dismiss this. Now, I say that to say this. That kid could not have been nicer. He was a sweet kid who he's 21 years old, and he said, sir, I'm trying to turn my life around. He just got out of prison for 1.5 years. And I'm like, I'm not a judge of that. I don't know what the hell he even did, but 1.5 years probably wasn't the worst thing on earth. But my point is, he was a nice kid. He had a baby and a fiance, and he's telling me, I'm trying to turn my life. I said, hey, God bless you, brother. But let me see what I can do to help.
But when just a second ago, we were talking about integrity. Above integrity is due diligence. If that police officer had done due diligence, the best thing you're going to do is try a plea bargain. Is just put in a good plea for the guy, saying, Your Honor, he's come out of penitentiary, he's got a job, he's got a baby, he realises he has a future where people depend on him. Can we give him a chance to prove himself, knowing that if he messes up, he's not going to get any sympathy in this court? That's
and I told him, I said, I whispered, go get your license now. Yeah. Like, I don't know how the hell you got here today, but get out of here, because that guy's going to follow you out of the door, I'm sure. Because if you get back in the vehicle, he's going to charge you right this time. Like, but slip away and go take care of business, and God bless you. But I love the kid. He was a really nice kid.
There used to be a solicitor. I mean, I'm sure he's still practicing. He got quite famous in England about sort of 20 years ago, 15 years ago, because he was very good at getting celebrities off their speeding tickets and stuff like that. And I remember you'd been interviewed one day, and somebody said, "Do you not feel bad about what you do?" He said, "No, not at all." He said, "I've never gotten anybody off a guilty charge. What I prove is they shouldn't have been in court in the first place, or that there was a problem with evidence." And one of the examples he gives, and I know this because there's a scheme in the UK called the Appropriate Adult Scheme, and I used to be part of that 20 years ago, where if somebody had been arrested and they either had mental health or were under 18 but not in social services, they would need a legal guardian to sit with them while they're being interviewed to make sure their lawyer is doing a good job and to make sure the police are not sort of badgering them. And so I probably sat through 1,000 hours of interviews, and this solicitor was saying that one day he was in court, and the police officer was stood on the stand giving his evidence, and he said, "Excuse me, are you chewing gum?" And he went, No, I'm not." And he said, "I just looked at the judge and said, Judge, I'm really sorry, but I think the police officer's lying. I think he's got chewing gum in his mouth, which you're not allowed to do in court for obvious reasons."
Right,
you know?
right.
And he went, "Yes, sorry, I am chewing gum, Your Honour." And he just went, and the solicitor said, he said, "At that point, I just said to the judge, he's under oath, he's given evidence, he's just lied about chewing something as simple as chewing gum. How can we trust his statement about this person speeding?" He said, if that police...
Great argument.
Yeah, he said, if that police officer had just said in that moment, "Your Honour, I apologise, I know I shouldn't be chewing gum, and I am," he said, "I don't have a case. The guy's going to get done for speeding."
Well, but also when you weigh things like that as an attorney, if he takes the gum out, I mean, I don't know, it's probably not a jury trial, it's just a judge. It's a bench trial. But in doing that, it also shows the disrespect of the court. Yeah. So you don't totally lose on that. If you say, "Are you chewing gum?" Yeah. "Oh, and that's against the rules, correct?" I mean, whatever.
Yeah. But that's
so it works kind of either. Yeah.
But that was his point. It kind
of works either way.
He said if that police officer had actually done his job properly, he would not have turned up in court with chewing gum in his mouth, and he wouldn't have lied on the stand about having it in his mouth. He said
he loses credibility.
Yeah, he said that's got nothing to do with me. That's just me doing my job as a solicitor. Just
right.
So, which yes, I've got so many stories about this type of thing, but we're going to move on. But one of the things that is a coincidence, because you've been booked in for a couple of months, is they've obviously released the JFK files allegedly. What do you make of the new releases?
All right, I'm going to start off with my story that I've told on several shows because I think it's pertinent. I think it's actually coming out. It's kind of aging well. So I grew up, like I said, in Virginia. My dad was law enforcement, and as a small child, my mom votes for Nixon in 1960 and falls in love with Kennedy. Back then, Kennedy, Nixon, the political divide is not that great. Everybody's a Cold Warrior pretty much, and Republican, Democrat pulling from the same end of the rope. And they were personal friends. They went into Congress the same year. They were elected in 46 in the House, and they go in January of 1947. And then Kennedy goes into the Senate in 52, and Nixon becomes vice president. Pretty young man. He goes into the 52 election. But anyway, she votes for Nixon, kind of falls in love with Kennedy. And I think she's really she's 31 at the time. It really hits her emotionally. Like I think it did a lot of young people in that time frame. You got, Caroline and John. You've got that whole young couple coming in off the oldest president, the youngest elected president. And she really likes Kennedy a lot. So when he dies, she cuts out all the newspaper clippings. She keeps all the magazines. And I'm like 5, 6, 7 years old. I'm going through it all. And I'm fascinated by it. I'm a year and a half when it happens. So as the time kind of moves on, I believe all the conspiracy theories, Mark Lane, and when it gets to Jim Garrison's trial in New Orleans, I buy every bit of it. There's 14 shooters, and the single bullet theory can't possibly be true. Then I do my master's thesis, and I really deep dive, and I start to see things that I really wasn't aware of, and I really kind of do a deep dive into the Warren Commission, but I also really follow the House Select Committee on Assassinations and some of the evidence that was presented before them. And right before I finished my thesis, I reach out to G. Robert Blakey, who was chief counsel to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. At this time in the early 90s, he's a professor at Notre Dame Law School. And I try to reach him, and a couple times, yeah. Well, I'll send you what I can. And I was like, can I meet with you? All right. So finally, he's like, meet. We meet up. We talk for 4 hours. We have a blast. He's a really nice man. And he tells me things I wasn't really totally aware of. And now I'm more and more convinced it is Oswald. But I had a question about who is Oswald? Who is he involved with? But I think it's a single shooter. So in 1994, a year after my thesis, I have a friend of mine. I'm coaching baseball. I have a friend of mine that's an athletic trainer. And we're in North Carolina at that time. And she said, there's a big convention for athletic trainers in Dallas. You want to go? I'm like, hell, let's drive. So we go to Atlanta, to New Orleans, all the way out to Dallas, 1,500 miles or whatever from North Carolina. So we get there. I drop her off the first day at the convention, and I go to the grassy knoll. So I go straight down to Dealey Plaza. And I'm looking around. I've been there, gosh, now in my life, probably 25 times. I was there for the 50th. I was there for the 60th, but I've been there hard. I know that section of Dallas so well. I know people that work the bars there. I go by and say, hey, get a beer. But I really love Dallas, too. It's a great town. But anyway, I'm on the grassy knoll, and a guy in a suit comes rolling down the hill from where Zapruder filmed. He comes straight down there, and he goes, hey, what do you think happened? I'm like, well, I'm one of those crazy people who think Oswald did it. And he goes, come with me. So we go up the hill. There's a guy with an apron, money changer type of thing. And he's got a bunch of magazines strapped to him. He's selling conspiracy theory things. And we argue with him for 15, 20 minutes. So we pull away. It turned out that I'm 32 at the time. I think this guy's like 35-ish. He's a few years older than me. And he goes, hey, dude, you really know your stuff. What's going on? I'm like, well, I just wrote a master's thesis. You too. What's your story? And he goes, well, I'm from Northern Virginia. And my daddy's somebody. And I'm like, okay. He goes, well, and I said, well, I'm from Virginia. And I said, what do you mean your daddy's somebody? He goes, well, back in the late 70s when I was a teenager, my dad made phone calls and got me with the House Select Committee on Assassinations in Congress as a page. So I got to hang around and hear all the hearings and see stuff behind. Really? Yeah. What are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, nothing really. I got my car here. My friend's going to the convention. So we go to where the backyard photograph was taken on Neely Street. We ride right up in the back, look right at it, film it, take pictures of it. We go to 1026 North Beckley Avenue where Oswald's room and house is. And we end up at the end of the day, we go to Jefferson Boulevard where he was arrested at the Texas Theater. And we eventually go to, which is now a law school there in Dallas on Main and Elm Street, was the Dallas City Police Headquarters where Oswald is shot. So we go and we find the basement right there at the spot where he's shot. And there's a couple of 20-somethings, which would have been now born in 1970-ish, who are kind of aware. They're born 7-8 years after the assassination, but they're kind of aware of what happened there. So this guy knows no strangers. He's like, hey, guys, y'all want to see what's in this building? And they're like, what do you mean? Well, I'll show you where Oswald was held. I'll show. So we get on the elevator that in the films you see Oswald come down right before he shot. We get in that elevator and go straight up. We go to the cells, and we also go to that lineup room. So the famous night interview of Oswald by the press with the lineup wall behind, we're in that room, and it's tiny, and I can't believe all those people got in there. So we come down, we take off, and then we go out to dinner with my friend, and at the end of it, he goes, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, same thing. She's going to the convention, and we're bugging out in a couple of days. He goes, you want to drive me out to the airport so I don't have to he's a pilot for American Airlines. So he's like, you want to drive me back out to the airport? Whenever he flies into Dallas, he runs over to Dealey Plaza and save me the taxi. I'm like, sure. So I drive him out. He's got an American Airlines garment bag. He takes that out the back seat and he starts to get out. I'll never forget this because of the way this is played out. I lean over the seat and I said, hey, I may not ever see you again. And I haven't. I may not ever see you again. What do you know that I'm not going to learn for 50 years? And he leans back in the car and he goes, brother, Oswald did it. I saw everything. He did the shooting. What they're covering up is his connections to U.S. intelligence. And I went, oh, he goes, yeah, he was dirty. He was dirty connected. And so as the years have gone by, JFK, then when Congress decides to do the investigation of the files with later release, and then they come out and say 2017, everything's to be released. Trump reneges on that. Then Biden drags his feet. And now Trump comes back with a second term, said, okay, it's all free. It's out. I think what you're seeing and what you're already hearing from the people that are spending the time to go through it is that the CIA knew about Oswald and the FBI knew about Oswald clearly. And I think that a lot of what was going on was clearly coverage of their methods, where they were entangled, what might have come out if all this had come clear. Now you're in a couple of lanes. There's a couple of important lanes to look at. Did they order the assassination? Did they groom Oswald for the assassination? Or did they see it coming and went, oopsie, we weren't paying attention? So what ass coverage are they doing? Is it because they're complicit in it? Or are they just sitting back and letting it happen? And I don't think that's what's really played out yet. Now, I have heard Oswald, and it makes sense. Oswald was one of 13 American military personnel that followed this same program. And it wasn't all Marine Corps, some other branches, where they were like, hey, I just figured out I'm a commie. I think I want to go to the Soviet Union. And that the Soviet Union was onto it. So when Oswald shows up in Moscow and it's like, hey, I want to be, I want to be a communist, or I want to be in the Soviet Union. At first they reject him. Then he does the risk cutting and says, oh, I'm trying to kill myself. So that he becomes a political problem. So they're like, okay, we got an American. He's trying to defect. He's crying about he wants to be here. Send him to Minsk. So they send him 400 miles away. And he stays a while. Then he decides that the Soviet Union is not right for him either. It comes back to the U.S. When he comes back, what's clear and what the evidence is showing, the CIA is tracking him. The FBI is tracking him. So they know of him. And they know that he presents at least somewhat a suspicion as to what his motivations are. So to go to New Orleans in 1963, and he's out there in August, and he gets arrested because he tangles with anti-Castro Cubans that he had gone to earlier and say, I'm a former Marine, I can help the cause. I can help you drive Castro out of Cuba. Then he's down the street with Fair Play for Cuba Committee, leaflets, and then there's a big scuffle. Well, one of the things that's interesting, and it was depicted in JFK, and I think it was an interesting point. Why is somebody filming that? Like it was being filmed almost like a documentary type of thing. He's just some kind of jerk guy down there handing out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. But that leads him to go on radio. So he gets some radio time. He gets some television time. So he's not a complete unknown. And then I think everything that comes down to the big key thing of what does all this mean is whatever the hell he was doing in Mexico City. What really happened there? And if he was, in fact, he's supposed to have met with a Soviet, they called it wet operations assassin. He was the Western Hemisphere assassination guy. He could have met him in Mexico City. There is a declassified memo. J. Edgar Hoover says, kind of beware, gang, we got a problem. It has been reported that Oswald, upon being rejected by Cuba and the Soviet Union to get to one or the other or both, said, really? You're going to reject Lee? I'll go kill Kennedy. And that was supposed to be something he literally stated in a room full of people. He went to, my understanding is he went to the Cuban embassy first, and they're kind of like, yeah, we kind of know your deal. Go down to the Soviet embassy. We already have heard about you. He goes to the Soviets because he says, I want to go to Cuba. Uncle Fidel's doing communism better than anybody. And the Soviets like, no, get the hell out of here. We already know about you. You've already run your game with us earlier. And that's when he says, really? You're going to kick me out? And supposedly makes this statement. Now, I was doing a show with somebody the other day, and they're like, what about the 6 Oswalds? And that's certainly been, and I didn't really address this part. There was a man, I believe he was British, Eddowes, I believe was the name, who started a thing in the late 70s that the guy, whoever this human is, that was buried in Fort Worth, Texas, under the name of Oswald wasn't Oswald.
Okay.
And so the body was exhumed in 1981. And when it was exhumed, they brought in dental records, and he had, what is the surgery? He had the surgery on the, it's a surgery that involves behind the neck, or behind the ear, I'm sorry, that was done, where there was a clear scar that indicated that he had that particular ailment or issue and had a surgery. Right. So it all lined up. It's Lee Harvey Oswald. It is the Lee Harvey Oswald, born in October 1939, that, grew up in New Orleans. and hits all the Marine Corps records. But there are still people that believe that Oswalds were popping up all over. There were fake Oswalds, and this was all to pin the story on this particular guy, whoever this particular guy is. So there's a lot of great conspiracies. But again, I think that Oswald is the lone shooter. Have you been to Dealey Plaza? Have you been to Dallas?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay. The one thing that most everyone says, and I remember on the 30th anniversary, one of the first people I met out there was from England, and we had a blast. He was a great guy and talked about the flight over, how long the flight was. But when I went on the 50th anniversary, I met people from all over the world that had come in for that event. And what almost to a person, what everyone says is like, oh my gosh, this is how small this is. And if you go on the 6th floor where they've done a really good museum, the museum's been there since the late 80s. They were going to just destroy the building, take it down. People thought it was a sore spot in the city. And then the Dallas Historical Society came and like, no, you can't destroy that building in that area. The Dealey Plaza area was part of the Works Project Administration during the Great Depression. It was built as sort of a nice park-like area at the west end of Dallas, with the school book depository originally being built there in 1899. There was a fire, and another building, I think, was built in the same spot in 1901. So that building is roughly 62 years old at the time of the shooting. So this group gets together, and they put the museum in. Originally, you could walk to that corner window, southeasternmost window, corner window on the 6th floor. Now it's all behind plexiglass with boxes arranged as they were on the day they were discovered by the police. But you can stand 2 windows down. The first time I was there with my dad. And my dad was Army, military. I mean, he was military police. He was also a former state trooper. He was a sheriff. I mean, law enforcement, military. And he had 20/10 eyesight. I mean, it was that he had the top qualifications as a marksman. And we go up on that floor together. And he's like 62 at the time. And I said, Dad, what do you think? He goes, that's easy. That's simple. Like a guy with a Marine Corps training is hitting targets 100, 200, 500 yards. He'd hit that easy. So I was talking to somebody military recently on the show, and he's like, well, I know as a military guy, there's no way that shot could be done. And I said, well, how far do you think it was at the headshot? He goes, oh, God, I don't know, 150, 200 yards. I'm like, 88. He went, what? I'm like, yeah, it was 88 yards. And he goes, like, I didn't realize that. I said, yeah, the first time Kennedy's hit, it's 51 yards. So it's 150 some odd feet. It grows to just about a football field. That's, 88 yards is shy of a football field. And he was shocked at the distance. So I think that's part is fair. He's a single shooter. But again, the biggest part, of course, that comes to people is here comes Jack Ruby. Ruby takes him out. And my dad being military and all this, in law enforcement, I was a year and a half. I have no memory, but my dad's watching TV. My mom's in the kitchen. And they're bringing Oswald out. He told me, it was like, bang. And he went, Liz, and to my mom, they just shot the guy. So they're standing there slack-jawed looking at the TV going, what the hell was that? Like there's cops everywhere. There's reporters everywhere. And a guy slips in and shoots him. So I asked my dad, I said, what do you think? He goes, well, I thought it had to be a conspiracy. This is the guy they bring in to silence him. This is a mob-looking figure, and then Jack Ruby was mob-related. There's no question about it. So then you get into the whole question of, if Ruby's there to silence him, who's Ruby working for? Is it just the mob? Is it the mob through the CIA? Was he paid off to do it? And it keeps spinning out of control. But saying all this thing I'm saying, what threw me off early, I think, as a teenager studying this was most of what I bought about the conspiracy theories were the inability of any person to have pulled this off. And as time went on, I started to see that the assassination wasn't in the 5.6 seconds that many had said. It's more like 8.5 seconds. And if I could go a little bit into this, what really convinced me, put me over the edge, is when I'm doing my investigation for my thesis, I find an article about how in the early 90s, it was actually 1993, there is a group called Failure Analysis out of Seattle, Washington. And what they do is computer mock-ups for criminal or civil trials. They can do it for car accident, reconstruction, shootings, whatever. And they'll do whatever you ask them to do. So they were asked for a mock trial of Oswald to do both. The single bullet theory works. the single bullet theory doesn't work. And one of the major proponents against the single bullet theory was John Connally, the Texas governor who got shot, the one that was struck sitting in the seat in front of Kennedy. What he told the Warren Commission was, I heard the shot. I'm a hunter. I had just been hunting a week before. I know a rifle shot, and I knew it was above me and behind me, which is a school book depository. So he said, I turned to my right, and when I could not see Kennedy, I began to turn to my left, which put his right wrist right over his left thigh and turned his shoulders in this fashion. And he goes, then I felt what felt like a doubled up fist right in the center of my back, or to the right of my center. And it knocked the wind out of me. I slide over towards my wife. Then I heard the third shot, and I saw the results of brain tissue and brain matter throughout the interior of the car, and I knew Kennedy had been hit. So he always believed that the first shot hit Kennedy. That's the one he starts searching back. And then the second shot hit him. It had to be a distinctive second shot. So that's what he always said. And when he looked at frames, so the Zapruder film, Abraham Zapruder sells it to Life magazine in the days following the assassination, and is not shown publicly until 1975 on the Geraldo Rivera ABC Good Night America show. But certain prints of it were in the very next magazine. The next Friday, Life magazine printed black and white frames of the assassination footage, but not the headshot at 313. Now, the Warren Commission took the film, 486 frames, and numbered all of the frames. So there was a reference to this frame, that frame, and it ran at 18.3 frames per second. So it gave you kind of a clock. There is no sound, but you could see certain things happening, like the headshot. You know that's a shot in that moment, right? So then you could work back. So they show these frames to Connally, and Connally's like, oh, I think I'm getting hit here. And he's pointing to like 238, 240. Josiah Thompson, that wrote a book, 6 Seconds in Dallas, said the same thing. Oh, Connally's not reacting until here. That created a timing problem. My understanding now, the pronunciation is Carcano, not Carano or whatever. It's Carcano is the right. Mannlicher Carcano or Carcano rifle. It's an Italian bolt action rifle. When the FBI got a hold of it, they tell stories that the minimum mechanical firing time of the weapon was 2.3 seconds. I have watched people fire it much faster. There's people on YouTube firing it in less than a second and recycling and firing another shot, or firing a shot in less than a second, firing another. Whatever that timing is. The argument started coming, well, if Kennedy's reacting here, where his hands begin to go to his throat, and Connally's hitting this 240 range, no one can recycle the rifle and fire another shot in that time. So back to failure analysis. They take two people of the size of Connally and Kennedy. Kennedy is 6 feet 1/2 inch, 72.5 inches tall. Connally's like 6'3" and change. So they find two models, and they have the two models sitting in chairs in the same relative positions, go through each movement they see on the film. They then take that information with 1993 technology and load it into a computer so they can now spin the car around 360 in every direction and see what you would see from all types of angles, using the models to represent the two victims in the car, or Kennedy and Connally. And they see something that no one had ever noticed in 30 years. At frame 224, which is exactly the same time Kennedy's hands start going to his throat, Connally's lapel jumps off his chest. And when they see that, they're like, uh-oh, that's like a pretty good timing confirmation of when the bullet went through him. His lapel goes off his chest. So you see this white V and the gray of his tie, and then it gets covered by his lapel. So another thing that you get into, I was reading a book about a doctor who was brought in to examine the evidence from the assassination and disprove the single bullet theory. He's at UCLA, recently graduated medical student, and now he's into practice. And he's like, man, I went in there thinking, if I can disprove the single bullet theory, I'm a hero. I'll be doing talk shows. I'll be writing books. He goes, the problem is once I got in there, you can't see anything else. The big key thing he said is when I saw the wounds to Connally and I saw the clothing. It is a keyhole entry. The type of ammunition that Oswald was using is the 6.5 millimeter bullet. It's 1.25 inches long. Connolly has in the cloth of his back under his right armpit a 1.25 inch wound or entry, which is oblong and not neat and circular. What does that mean? The bullet passed through something else. So the bullet's in yaw. Now, when it is recovered, supposedly on a stretcher, and there's all kinds of, conspiracy theories related to that, that bullet had grains of it taken from the core of the bullet, the lead core, and they match in composition exactly what was taken from Connolly's wrist. So it could be the same bullet. But the big bottom line is people look at it, and it's almost like, since we're on film here, the bullet is like this. It's sort of curved in. And what conspiracy theorist books tend to do is they show it from this angle, and they go, look at that pristine bullet. It doesn't have a mark on it. When you turn it to the side, you realize it's somewhat flattened. So next thing about that is, how could it have been so little damage? There was a doctor that testified before the House Select Committee. He said, look, the bullet that rifle has a muzzle velocity of 2,100 feet per second. By the time it struck Kennedy, 18. Maybe by the time it's down the street, it hits Kennedy, 18, 19. It passes through soft tissue, no bone. Okay, comes out of Kennedy. Now it's 16, 15, 16. It then begins to yaw, goes into tumble. It's decelerating as it strikes Connolly. It goes through Connolly, breaks his fifth rib, 5 inches of the fifth rib, goes out to the wrist. By now, it has enough energy to break his wrist and lodge in his thigh. So one of the members of the House Select Committee said, tell me more, doctor. He said, it's like this. This bullet, at its highest velocity striking bone, will do what happened on the headshot. It will fail the jacket. The soft lead will spray out and the jacket will fail. That's maximum amount of velocity hitting dense bone. He goes, if you slow it down to another threshold, it will break bone and do less deformity to the bullet. You slow it enough that it can still pass through tissue, it'll bounce off bone. And they're like, that makes perfect sense. So what drives me crazy about so much about the assassination and what researchers say, there was a study that's printed in the Warren Commission where they take the rifle and fire it directly into the wrist of a human cadaver, and it blows up, mushrooms the bullet. And they're like, see, it broke Connolly's wrist. Look what happened. I'm like, yeah, if you fire it directly into the bone, you probably do get that result. But we're talking about a bullet that was decelerated by Kennedy's body, spins out and leaves a keyhole entry in Connolly's body, blows a 2-inch hole in the front of his chest, or in his chest, and then onto his wrist. And again, if you look at the film, there's a guy that when I was teaching a class on this, who had put together a loop that's wonderful for this purpose. It starts at about 220 and runs through 230, and it runs on a loop. And when I taught this in class, I'm like, guys and gals, pretty much train your eyes right in the middle of the two of them. And you see this, you see this, you see this, you see this, and you see it at the exact same time. I'm like, you tell me that Kennedy's not reacting at the exact same time that the lapel is flying out. And they're like, wow, I do see that. And I'm like, so what do you think? So single bullet theory works, headshot works, and there's an errant shot that bounces off one of the trees or whatever happens at that point. That accounts for the 3 shots. The vast majority of witnesses thought 3 shots. And I know I'm rambling here, but let me make one other point that I think is very, very important. When I was teaching the class, I would ask students all the time, and it was rare, but I would have myself like, hey, you ever witnessed a shooting? Yeah, 99% of them had, but every once in a while I'd have a student, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I really want to press what they saw, but I did in Richmond, Virginia. I went to a movie house, and I was waiting on a young lady to come to a movie, and I'm standing out in front of these doors. There are 8 doors. There's 4 double doors at the front of this movie house, with 16 screens inside. It's a pretty big place. And I hear pop, and I went, wow, that was a gunshot. That was a pistol shot, wasn't it? Kind of like, looked around, and then boom, this kid 3 to 4 feet from me goes running by me. And I went, the kid just went running by me. And then I heard pop, and I went, oh, I see why, because this kid's got a gun and he's chasing it. My point I would make to the students, if you had asked me, and I expected there were 10 police cars and 5, or not even that. They're rolling up, they catch the kid, and I kind of wait around like somebody's going to ask me something. They don't, I get in the car, I take off. Somehow back then I contacted the young lady and said, meet me somewhere else. We went to a restaurant. She didn't believe me at first that I witnessed the shooting. Then it was on the news. Turns out, 16-year-old boy goes to the theater. He thinks this guy's messing with his girlfriend. He brings a gun. Okay. But the point I made to the class is, in the moments after, if you had said, here are the two kids in front of 10 or whatever, I couldn't have picked out either one of them. No way. I am not a brave person at all. But it's funny what you do when that happens. I didn't scream, holler, drop. I just went, oh, that guy's shooting at that guy. You don't know what you're going to do. I mean, he could have easily turned and shot me, but I just went like, son of a gun. Now, if you just said how many shots were fired, I'd have to say at least 2. Was it more? Could have been. I don't know. And what was the sequence? Damn if I know.
Yeah.
All I remember was pop, that's a pistol shot, and looked. And I went, I just heard a pistol shot from inside. So when the kid went running by me, it didn't even register to me he's running from a shooter. It's just a kid just went running by. Then the back kid shot again, and I went, okay, now I think I see what's going on. Now, the people that heard what they heard in Dealey Plaza, there was 208 material witnesses. Josiah Thompson did a map of what everybody said, and as part of my thesis for the hell of it, I took color-coded pens and put dots based on whether they said school book depository, grassy knoll, and number of shots. And there's a clear pattern. The closer you are to the street, the more the witnesses thought school book depository. The more you move towards the grassy knoll or on the other side of Elm towards Commerce or Main and Commerce, you got different results. However, no one said anything other than 2, 3, or 4. And when they did, the 4 was like, 1%. 3s were the vast majority. And nobody said both locations. So you were either 3 all from the school book depository or 3 from the grassy knoll. So it depends. You hear the argument, it's the echo chamber, whatever. All I know is when you're in there, you hear horns and sounds. But I'm thinking based upon your location, you would feel whatever you would feel relative to where you think the shots came from. But the people that are staring at Jack and Jackie, the president and the first lady, they don't hear the first shot and go, I got you, Sally. Let me go ahead and get that 2, 3, 4. Okay, second shot. Nobody's doing that. Nobody's running a stopwatch. So when they were asked later, people said, I think it took 2 seconds, 10 seconds, a minute. They don't know. And having witnessed it myself, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and also, if I said to somebody, like somebody said, it was 2 seconds or 4 seconds, play 2 seconds to somebody in dead silence and say, tell me when to stop.
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed how many people can't tell 2 seconds from 10 seconds. It sounds ridiculous, but our mind, what we think we can do and what we do are very different.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I did in a class one time with students like, hey, I don't believe the Oswald thing. He didn't have enough time. So how much time do you need? Or what do you think there was? And he goes, well, they're saying 6 seconds. And I said, anybody got a secondhand stopwatch or somebody had like a stopwatch on a watch? And I said, you ready? And they're, yeah. And I said, shot. I'm working the ball. Shot. I'm working the ball. Shot. That seemed rushed. The kid was like, and I said, what'd you get? He goes, 5.7.
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you think now? And another thing about conspiracy people that bugged me years ago, somebody wrote a book and said, if there's a minimal mechanical firing time of the rifle of 2.3, that would mean that 3 shots would take 6.9. And I'm like, what an idiot to say that. The rifle is set to go on the first shot. There's only 2 workings of the bolt, so it's 4.6 minimal. But people were just going with that like, wow, there's no way he could have fired in less than 5 seconds. He didn't have time. Why? I said, you don't work the bolt to fire the first shot. That's a given. You've already
it's a loaded gun ready to go. Once that trigger's pulled, you've then started the next sequence.
Then you started, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's weird because, and this is that thing with common people don't always apply common sense. There's I've had this conversation with people before with the conspiracy theory with the late Princess Diana. Because there's loads of conspiracy theories about how she's killed and how the accident happened. And I say to people, like, I don't disbelieve conspiracy theories, but you've got to be careful what dots you join up to paint the picture you're looking for, because everybody ignores some really important factors. That there were 4 people in the car and one of them survived. He was the person that was the bodyguard. He was wearing his seatbelt. The three people that died were not wearing seatbelts. The driver, the French driver, I think he was French. He was Al Fayad's driver. He was over the legal limit and on medication. So you got a drunk driver on medication driving through the streets of Paris at 80 miles an hour, and he goes across a lane to make it for a tunnel in a 2-ton car that's not designed to go. And the general consensus is that if they were all wearing seatbelts, they would have all survived.
Right.
So before people I'm not saying that it wasn't possible that she was taken out. I'm just saying, before you can make that happen, how do you guarantee they're not wearing their seatbelts?
Yeah, and also the thing that if one survives, they may tell a story, and that was the thing. I started to go down this road. Let me clarify what I was getting ready to say earlier about the assassination and how I kind of got misled originally by how it happened. When I was writing my thesis, I saw a really good quote by Gary Hart, the former senator that got run out of the presidential election over Donna Rice. But Gary Hart made a really good point. He said, the way I see the assassination, there's two parts, or there's two competing interests, or there's a war between these two factions. How it happened and the whodunit.
Yeah.
And he made and what I really thought when I heard that the first time was like, yeah, most of what I'm hearing is Oswald can't do it. No one can do it. I'm like, well, it got done. Somebody shot him. Okay. It happened however it happened. And if the bullet fragments in the car from Oswald's rifle, and Oswald mail ordered the rifle, and then, went over to Ruth Payne's house the night before and took it out of the rolled up blanket, there's a rifle, and there's evidence that it's that rifle, and there's evidence he's the only school book depository employee that flees the scene. And he shoots a cop, and he hides in a theater, and he tries to shoot another cop. Doesn't sound like an innocent guy. Okay, but if you're going to say Kennedy got shot by the mob, CIA, whatever, and your evidence is Oswald couldn't do it, that had to be in the professional team, all right, then we could go down that road. Another important thing that I heard about 10 years ago from a historian, and I thought it was a great line. He said, the problem with the Kennedy assassination is there's two major churches. And I was like, oh, where's this going? And I thought about how this applied to me, because he said there's a Church of the Grand Conspiracy. Mark Lane is its high priest. Oliver Stone is one of its favorite sons. And it's no matter how slight the inconsistency is in something, it means grand conspiracy. Yeah. He goes, but the other church is the church of the lone nut. Vincent Bugliosi, Gerald Posner, and I think Gerald Posner's dead on. I think he's absolutely right about everything he's saying about this. I've always thought Case Closed was the best book. And, and Vincent Bugliosi wrote Reclaiming History and passed away here a few years ago. He was the Manson prosecutor in L.A. So in that one, no matter what little thing may turn up to indicate maybe complicity with someone else in Oswald, they say only lone nut. And this historian said, there's a third lane that no one seems to really address. Oswald did it, but for whom? And then I was like, that's me. So when I wrote my thesis, one of my thesis advisors, or one of my defense board members, was William Whitehurst, who just turned 100 the other day, by the way.
Wow.
He was 18 years in Congress. So I was there 32 years ago getting my master's. So he's in his late 60s. Beautiful guy. I loved him. But he was 18 years in Congress. So when I'm finishing up my thesis and I'm having to defend it, he was like, Jack, I love this thing. I want it in the New Yorker magazine. I want you published. But there's only one thing that bothered me, son. I said, what's that? He hedged your bets at the end of it. You were going Oswald full tilt, then you pulled out at the end. I'm like, well, sir, I'm not sure if he wasn't involved with something. No. So he bought the company line. Now, what he knew from 18 years in Congress, and kind of what the company line was of the U.S., I don't know. And another reasonable explanation for cover-up is, as you know, in 1962, Cuban Missile Crisis. Yep. 1961, Bay of Pigs failure. It's in 1963, and you got to believe that when they're in Dallas on the ground flying back, they're like, this could be World War III. And if we pin this on the Cuba, or we find that Cuba's behind it, or we find the Soviet, oh, hell, the people are going to be asking or begging or demanding World War III. Yeah. So if if you get Oswald and you can stick it on him and end it all because you know that this might go dirty somewhere else, I can understand that. I think
that's, I've always thought, like, and the more I talk, like, listening to you and I talk about it, I think it's almost, and I don't mean this to come across as clumsy as it might sound, I think it's almost irrelevant whether Oswald did it or not. The real question is why it was done and who was behind it. Do you know what I mean? Because I think that's, people get so hung up on Oswald didn't do it. He couldn't have been. They're not answering, but why did somebody want the president dead? I mean, like, why did even Oswald want him dead?
But to go down another whole road on that, and I think it's worth going down. It's really the big part of what Gerald Posner said in Case Closed in 1993 is he did the deep dive study on Oswald. And he says, there have been two major psychological evaluations done of Oswald, one by the Soviet Union, and they totally rejected him of having any value to them.
Right.
And the other was when he was a truant in New York, the New York public school system said, go in there, have him examined. He never comes to school. He rides the subway all day. He stays in the New York Zoo. And because of them going after him and Marguerite, his mother, she just picked up and went back to Texas and just tried to avoid it. But in the evaluation, the psychiatrist was like, whoa, this kid's got real problems. He's dangerous. There's supposed to have been a knife incident where he pulled a knife on his stepbrother's wife. So he has these violent tendencies. If he takes the shot at General Walker, which I think he probably did, I think he's involved with that too, he shows signs of instability. Now, the big thing that one might ask is he the loser that some portray him as? Is he the secret agent guy? His brother said that his favorite television show in his mid-teen years was I Led Three Lives, which was the story of the FBI agent Philbrick, who had been a raging commie and then decides to go against it. He joins the FBI to infiltrate the Communist Party in the U.S. So his brother Robert said, Lee was anti whatever you were. He just was whatever. Yeah. He was in his mind playing this double agent guy all the time, which was indicated in what I said earlier. If he's out there playing footsie with the guys that are anti-Castro and the next day he's handing out pro-Castro literature, what game is he playing? Now, one of the things Marina says, and people think she's a Russian agent, that she was sent over, she was allowed, there's all these conspiracies. But at the human level, if this is true, he was known to be notoriously broke, known to be notoriously tight on money. He couldn't keep jobs. He seemed to be somewhat antisocial. His Marine Corps friends, if he had any, or the Marine Corps guys didn't really like him. Let's accept all that's true. He fell in love with another girl in Russia. She rejected him, and he bounced right to Marina, and then kind of let Marina know that she was a second choice. So they had all this volatility in their relationship from the start. But so he's 5 weeks living at the 1026 North Beckley Avenue before the assassination. He gets the job through Ruth Payne and Lenny Mae Randall, who is Buell Wesley Frazier's sister, who drives him to the school book depository after weekends visiting his kids in Irving. So on Thursday, November 21st, Lee comes to Buell Wesley Frazier. He once went by Wesley. Now he calls himself Buell, but he goes to him, 19-year-old kid, and says, hey, you want to give me a ride home tonight so I can go see my wife and kid? And he goes, surely, anytime. But wait a minute. It's Thursday, not Friday. He goes, oh, yeah. I got to get some curtain rods from back at the house. I got to get some curtain rods from Ruth Payne's house for my 1026 North Beckley Avenue rooming house. There was no need for curtain rods. He had curtains hanging in the. All right, so there's no need for him. And Ruth Payne didn't have any awaiting him. But he goes home that night. He had never gone without asking. Ruth Payne did not like him. They did not get along particularly well. She thought he was a bad guy and a bad husband, whatever. But she pulls in from the grocery store, and he's on the lawn playing with the kids. Marina comes rolling out and says, I'm so terribly sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know why he did this. Okay, so it's kind of a rough night for everybody. And Lee spends the last night before he's arrested the next day in bed with Marina. And earlier in the evening, he had asked her to come back to him. Let's get a new place. Let's start over. And she says to the Warren Commission later, I regret to say I was kind of like in the first time in a position of power, and said, no, I think I'm going to think it over for a while. I don't think I want to come back to you. So that night when they sleep together, she said at one point, to be affectionate, she puts her foot like over on his leg and he kicks it off. And she's like, oh, he's ticked. Okay, whatever. So by the time she gets up in the morning, he's long since gone to work. When she gets up in the morning, she notices in a little teacup that her grandmother in Russia had given her, there's a wedding band and $174. So for a guy to take all but $15 he has on him and put it all with his wife and says, on the way out the door, buy Junie, the daughter, buy her some new shoes, and then leaves his wedding band. What she believed and what some like Posner believe is he went home, or he went to Ruth Payne's home on the night of the 21st indifferent. And there's a good chance he didn't know about the Kennedy motorcade. It was printed in the papers on the 19th Tuesday and 20th Wednesday. And he notoriously would go to the break room and read papers that had already been purchased by other people. There's a good chance that on the 20th or 21st, he found the paper and went, oh, hell, I got a chance to shoot Kennedy, or let me go see what the wife's going to do. So he may have been that guy in that situation. It's like, I'm going to give my wife one more shot. If she rejects me, screw it. I'm going to go into history. Maybe that's what she believed that. I have a friend of mine, very bright guy. He got a PhD from UVA, University of Virginia, in foreign affairs. And he did a deep dive study. He comes up to me one time and he goes, guess what? And I said, what? Oswald was arrested with $13 and change on him. He gave $1 to Whaley, the cab driver earlier, on a 95-cent fare. He gave him $1 and left. So he had 13 plus one at least. So he was carrying roughly $15. So my friend says, you know what that would have got you in November of 63? I said, what? He goes, to the Mexican border by bus. I'm like, oh. He goes, I think he was trying to get to a bus station.
Yeah.
And he's on the run. And I mean, that kind of makes sense too, that he would have been trying to get back to Mexico. And maybe he's trying to get back to handlers. And maybe he's trying to get back to the embassy and say, hey, it's Lee here. Remember how I left here and said I'd go shoot Kennedy? Here I am. Go send me to Fidel. I don't know. But if it's true what Maureen is saying, that she believed that had she said, honey, I'm with it, let's go find a place to stay, let's give it a second start, maybe he never goes to the garage to get the rifle. Maybe he just goes back to work the next day and forgets about it. Yeah. And speaking about people too, I'll say this real quick. I was there in 92, and Harold Norman, who's one of the sweetest, he's long since passed, he was one of three gentlemen that was right below Oswald's window. There was three guys. It was Junior Jarman, Bonnie Ray Williams, and Harold Norman. Well, he was out working at one point for the 6th Floor Museum. The story I heard on the street there in 92 was that some of the PhD types that were working there got upset that everybody was looking for him because he had been there that day. So now he's on the street selling some of these newspapers. So I see him, and I got a friend with a camera, and I have it somewhere among my stuff, VHS tape. I said, Mr. Norman, do you mind speaking? He goes, come on. Yes, sir. Come on over to talk to me. And I said, okay, tell me what you remember about the shooting. He goes, brother, I'm sitting right there on the 5th floor, and I hear boom, click, click, boom, click. And it's right above me. And he goes, we've got stuff falling from the ceiling on us. And I'm looking around, and I said, well, what about the people that ran the grassy knoll? He said, man, I never understood it because I knew the shooting came from above us. But I did see people rolling. Some have said they were rolling up the hill to watch the car go back to Stemmons Freeway and on to the hospital. They were just kind of chasing the side of the car. They weren't chasing an assassin. I don't know. But he said, I knew this. That shooting was taking place right above me. So I said, what about Oswald? Did you ever talk to Oswald? And he goes, oh, yeah. He'd been there about a month. And I'm like, what was he like? He goes, didn't talk to anybody much. Like, I'd see him in the morning. Hey, buddy. And he'd be like, whatever, and just keep walking. So I said, you actually had contact with Oswald? He goes, what I remember on the day of the shooting, at 10 o'clock, people were already starting to mill around because they wanted to get a good view. And he came up to me and a couple other guys and said, hey, what's going on? And they're like, President's getting ready to come by. And he goes, whatever, and then walked away. And I said, do you think he could have done it? He goes, absolutely. So a lot of people poo-pooed his bang and he said he heard the cartridges hitting the floor. And this is an old construction with wooden floors. So when the Warren Commission goes there in June of 64, it gets brought up, or May of 64, I believe it was. It gets brought up that he said this. So it's a warm day in Dallas. So they open the windows and they drop the copper casing from the bullet, and you could hear it clear as day. They said on the 5th floor, if they dropped it on the floor from above, you could hear it crystal clear. So what he said didn't make sense. And I just thought that was really, to talk to him. He had a visual memory of the shooting that only he has.
He did. I'm just conscious of time because I know you have to shoot.
Yeah.
So just to wrap it up, 2 things. Where can people find you?
Okay. Online, generally, it's More to Consider, Moore, play on my name. And Moore's pretty British, right? I mean, it comes all the way back from England. So More, Moore, to consider.com is where you can find all my platforms. I'm posting a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I post a lot of stuff on Rumble. And so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. And I got into this space because, I had a friend that's my producer. She's kind of like, you love to run your mouth. You know a lot about certain things. Why don't you just get on there? So I've been doing baseball. I've been doing Kennedy assassination. I love what we opened with, the legal stuff.
Yeah.
I love to talk law and the ethics of being a lawyer and what we really kind of go through, because I don't think a lot of people recognize what it's like.
Absolutely. And so just lastly, because I just like to randomly ask this question to everybody.
Yeah.
I want you to imagine there's a time machine, such a thing as a time machine. You can go back in time, right? The vehicle of the time machine is a car. So I want to know what car you would use as a time machine. Where would you go? And what would be playing on the radio?
Oh, wow. All right. Car in a time machine. I think my mid-'80s Honda Prelude was my favorite first car because it had roll-up headlights and looked kind of sexy, looked kind of Ferrari-type looking, I guess, even though it was a cheap car and I loved it. But, yeah, I would probably have my 83 Honda Prelude with the spoiler on the back. Okay, so the next thing is, where would I go? Well, I clearly think I would park in Dealey Plaza about 12:15 p.m. on November 22nd. So I'm there 15 minutes early to run around and know. I've always thought about, though, if I got ahead of that, like, where would I look? Would I watch the window? Would I watch the car? Would I watch the grassy knoll? Where would I stand? But I want to get that view to see, to know everything that's happening. And song that would be playing, I don't know. I kind of think, because I've been talking about it so much lately, it's Prince, and how a lot of people I don't think really appreciate Prince enough. But I don't know, Purple Rain, I guess, because it's also mid-'80s. It's in my wheelhouse of time, and I just love Prince so much as an artist. Well, another thing I was explaining to someone the other day is, coming from the time I came from, it was a long time before I found the video of Whitney Houston, who I saw live in concert, and George Michael. They did a duet.
Yeah.
And when I started talking about it, this friend of mine was like, so what's, I said, wait a minute. That means I knew that Whitney and George Michael occupied the same space and sang together.
Yeah.
And they're like, wow, you get really passionate. I'm like, George Michael and Whitney Houston? It's just like, it's that.
I tell you what, I think one of the worst things about the world we live in today is prime Whitney Houston had one of the greatest voices ever.
No question.
Right. But Whitney Houston, like prime, like 20-year-old, 20s Whitney Houston, she was beautiful. She was gorgeous, stunningly beautiful. One of the and I don't think we ever really realized in that moment when it was all happening just what a phenomenon she was.
Yeah, she. I was 25 feet from her in Richmond, Virginia, at one of the concerts, and she was tall and thin, had the most beautiful mouth. I mean, all the singers have big mouths, and she was just gorgeous with all this white teeth. I really think what's kind of a shame is the kind of music she did, because I think it was just like a lot of pop junk that made a lot of money. Because the voice talent, it's the best.
Yeah, definitely.
And when I saw her in concert, I'll never forget. She's in Richmond in concert. I saw her in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She said, well, guys, I'm going to kind of go back to my roots a little bit. And I hope you like this, but it's basically like, I'm going to do it anyway. And she started singing gospel.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah.
It was like, and Sissy Houston, her mom, sang backup for Elvis with the Sweet Inspirations. Dionne Warwick was the first cousin. And, there was just a time that, the Aretha Franklins, I mean, the music was just different, and I miss all that.
Auto-tune hadn't been invented. Auto-tune hadn't been invented then. So what you heard is what you were hearing. But look, I need to let you go because you have somewhere else to be.
I do, but I do want to do this again soon. Please, let's.
Well, I was going to suggest that we actually do connect again and do it again soon.
Yeah, I want to do this very, very soon because I feel bad because I got to kind of run along and all that, but I got a little obligation to go to. But
it works to my benefit. It works to my benefit. Getting you back on for another hour works well for me, and we can do this again.
Oh yeah. And let's do that. I'm gonna tell Laura immediately. Let's set up something again really quick.
Yep.
And God bless you, brother. I really appreciate your time. You've been awesome.
Lovely to meet you, and I look forward to having another conversation with you soon. So take care.
God bless you, man. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. And there you have it. Yeah. So. Maybe it was Oswald. Who knows? I mean, it's one of those that nobody seems to be able to agree on the evidence. I think he did it. I don't know why he did it, and I think that's probably the biggest crux of the problem. Why? What was his motivation for doing it? And did they know he was going to do it? And maybe we'll never find out. Maybe we will never really know the truth. But on that note, thank you very much for watching, for listening, for the support. I do appreciate it. And as always, wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.